Welcome to Matters of DeCorum. I am Scott Corum. This is what matters to me. Yes, my hair is darker. I did a bit for my last video, which I entitled Uncle Drac Says Insensitive Things, where I brought back the character Uncle Drac. I'll be bringing him back from time to time. That means actually dyeing my hair dark. I got a couple of do-it-yourself men's dye kits. I do not understand why they are substantially different from women's dye kits, but apparently they are, and dyeing your hair is hard. When you have hair this long, more so. So it's going to need another round of dye work, but I'm happy with it. People can't stop looking at the beard. I've meant to talk about villains for a while. When I write, or when I run a game, I use villain-based plotting. I know what the villain is thinking, and I know what the villain's plan is. That is going to happen no matter whether the player characters or the characters in what I'm writing decide to follow along with it. That's the overriding arc. The events that are happening that are things that need to be dealt with are elements of the villain's plan. That allows a little bit of flexibility in that I don't have to respond to each and every little thing the characters do. I can, and that can give the characters some agency, but at the same time, the villain has agency and is a force that needs to be dealt with and stopped at every turn. I like using good villains. There's a problem with constantly using good villains, though. Whether you're James Bond or Batman or a superhero or a franchised secret agent, you are going to have a lot of villains. The more villains you have, the greater the chance that fewer of them are going to be good villains. It's easy to make bad villains. It's painfully easy to make bad villains. Some of the most famous villains of all time, I qualify as bad villains. I've written about this before, but it bears repeating. The first real James Bond villain, Dr. No, he was a good villain. He was driven, he was purposed, he had a goal, and he was following it in a efficient and lethal manner. I liked me some Dr. No. Auric Goldfinger is the biggest waste of skin any villain has ever been. You get all this hype for Goldfinger being a great movie. And Goldfinger is a good Bond film, don't get me wrong. But Art Goldfinger is a terrible villain because 99% of what he does doesn't make any damn sense. Goldfinger's entire motivation and personality is based on excess and wastefulness. He is so rich that he can do these extravagant things for less than no reason, and his motivation is he's rich and he's kind of a dick. So, villain. Being rich and kind of a dick does not automatically make you a villain. I almost made a political statement there, and I held myself back. Restraint. Restraint makes a good villain. When Goldfinger invites the head of all the mob families in America to come visit him at his ranch, think about that. He has sent for these people cars and planes and tickets. I'm sure all of it first class. These guys aren't getting out of bed for less than 6 figures. Probably more like 7, even at that time. He brings them all to his ranch. That's not a small expense. He's got to make sure that there's places for them to stay. He could, house them at the ranch, or they could confirm that they've got hotel reservations someplace else. But this is Goldfinger. He's covering it all, on him. because he's a class guy like that. He brings these people into his big ranch house where there is a giant model of his super plan. The giant model of his super plan, completely unnecessary because he could have worked all of this out on pencil and paper. Back in the day, that would have been how he did it. Engineers would get together, there's some slide rules and some tools and angles and drawn out the plan and done all their timing. But no, he's got a big model. Okay, he wants to be big and flashy. The model lights up. Okay, the model's 20 feet across. It's still, not all that expensive. The model has its own set of hydraulic risers, bringing it up from a sub-level through a closed steel shutter, all of which operates by a single control panel. That's some expense. I don't care how big your ranch house is, or you didn't already have one in there. You didn't. You did not buy the ranch house with that in it. That's expensive. You show these gangsters this model, and you tell them your plan. Okay. That's Bond villainy. That's presentation. That's pageantry. Because a good Bond villain has a little sense of both. Then you leave the room to let them think about their involvement, and you kill them all. Yeah, okay. Killing them all would have been simple. Shoot them. Or carbon monoxide, no, nerve gas. He's got nerve gas that pumps into the room. He has the gear for pumping nerve gas into the room. He stole the nerve gas. That's one of the things those people there had done for him already, stolen him some nerve gas. So he's got the nerve gas. That's a give me. That's he paid for people to steal it, but he didn't pay the full price for the nerve gas. The equipment to pump nerve gas into a large room, that's expensive. That's not part of your standard air conditioning or heating. That's pricey. The equipment to pump it out is more expensive because you just can't vent nerve gas out into your ranch. You've got horses the next building over. No, you've got to pump that into filters and charcoal and whole other levels of expense. All of this to kill like 15 guys. That's more than $1 million a head. The one guy who decides he's going to bow out early, I don't want to be a part of this. How do they deal with him? Puts him in a car with a chunk of gold in the back, like a few $100 of gold in the back of the car. Has the car driven to a trash yard or a garbage yard where the guy's locked in the car and it's crushed. So the price of the car, and then extract my gold from, that's not easy. There's whole other processes there. That gold's been compacted into the back of the car. It's not going to get that much more compressed. Gold's very dense. But the process of getting it out and repurifying it, because now there's dude squashed into it, not cheap. Goldfinger could have hired the man with the golden gun, Scaremonger. $1 million a shot, guaranteed hit. Could have just given him 15 addresses and $15 million and said, make these people go away. And it would have been cheaper than what Goldfinger did to get rid of these guys. That's a good test. If it would be cheaper to hire another Bond villain to do your work for you, then you are working too inefficiently as a Bond villain. Everything about Goldfinger's plans didn't make sense. They seem to be very convoluted and twisted, and that's because every time you could think about what he might be doing, no, he was doing something dumber, actually dumber. He was actually being less intelligent than you thought he was being. The whole Bond's about to get cut in half by a laser, and, no, Mr. Bond, I expect you to die. That's supposed to be a really, really clever Bond villain moment. And on the surface, it is. That's awesome. No, No, we're not going to talk about this. I'm going to kill you. Slowly and efficiently, using enough energy to power the state of Michigan for 2 weeks, but I'm going to kill you. In an incredibly wasteful way, but no, you're just going to die. Bond has heard one word that makes it look like he might know stuff. Calls it out. Can you afford to not know if I've reported that, Goldfinger? Goldfinger thinks about it. He takes a sweet time. He's got a sweet time. He could have gone on a golfing vacation and come back, and Bond still wouldn't have been cut in half. It was a slow laser. But then he lets Bond live. Not only does he let Bond live, but he lets Bond walk around his ranch and talk to all of his people and get all the intelligence he could possibly need to stop him. Auric Goldfinger's a terrible villain. When you're writing villains, especially if you have a weekly game, say it's a weekly superhero game, I've been invited to play in a Champions game, a classic 4th edition Champions game, and I'm really excited about that because I'm a big fan of Champions. Been playing since it was 2nd edition. If you understand why Foxbat isn't a good villain, then you know why I'm thrilled about Champions and where this exercise comes from. But you've got to have a villain constantly. There's got to be, if not a main villain every week, there's got to be at least a lieutenant or two. There's got to be a big bruiser that you're going to have to work through. There could be 1,000 minions, and minions don't have to be good. Minions exist so that superheroes can flex their muscles, or that Bond can run through a building just machine gunning these guys down. You know, no name tags, faceless guys with guns, and they die like popcorn. You can always pop some more. But you got to have at least one headliner for your week. You got to have that one fight every session that is the reason that you have a superhero game. Or any role-playing game is going to have your fight of the week. I like the fight of the week theory, that you culminate something in a large bit of conflict that allows people to push their limits and test their measure. But having a good villain to deal with every week, that's hard. Batman has a huge rogues gallery. Even if you just look at the Adam West series, which was my entrance to the character of Batman, and you look at the rogues gallery that he had, they were all well acted. But there were some bad villains. The Joker is an excellent villain. The Penguin, depending on how he's portrayed, can be a very good villain. Burgess Meredith's Penguin in the Adam West series, amazing. I was afraid of the Penguin. The Riddler isn't a good villain. He's an interesting villain. Don't get me wrong. There's a difference between a good villain and an interesting villain. An interesting villain is something that has a really clever catch or an interesting tag, something that lets you sink your teeth into the analysis of the character. But a good villain does not have a psychological compulsion to tell the heroes what he's doing and how to stop him. That's not a villain, that's a call for help. Then you get the B-string villains from the Adam West series. Egghead. I love Vincent Price. Oh my God. Vincent Price is one of those actors whose career I grew up soaked in. The Hammer horror films and everything he showed up in. The Abominable Dr. Phibes still gives me goosebumps. But Egghead was a crappy Batman villain. He really was. He had an obsession with eggs. He created tear gas by feeding onions to chickens for a month. No. If a villain turned out to be just an element of the camp, as opposed to an actual purposed meaningful villain, they weren't a good villain. The original Mr. Freeze from the Adam West series, poorly conceived, well executed, I suppose, but I'm going to freeze everything. Yeah. Why? Why is that a good thing? Why does that drive you? A good villain's motives can be examined, explored, maybe dissected a little bit. A good villain might have a little bit of, they could be redeemed in their character. A little research. According to the folks at Mythic Scribes, here's the elements that make an epic villain. Epic villain is powerful. They have the ability to exert their personality or physical force, something that gives them the right to stand on top of the hill for a little bit, even if it's social power or control. An epic villain is intelligent. They're not easily fooled. They don't have a mental Achilles heel. They're bright and they're imaginative, and they can match wits with a smart hero. There's someone who can toe-to-toe on a mental level with intellectuals. You have to be their intellectual equal to even begin to understand what they're doing. Good villain, an epic villain, is immoral or amoral. Morals do not matter to them. For some reason, they have abandoned a moral code, or they have adapted a moral code that is so different or alien from one that society holds true that they appear to be the evil by their actions, their thoughts, their code. An epic villain is wounded. There is something about them. They have a malfunction. No matter how smart, no matter how powerful, there is something in their background that makes them not all right. They are conflicted and have a problem. They may never let anyone see that they are wounded, but there's a tragedy in them. And that tragedy not only gives them depth, but it drives their personality. An epic villain is determined. One of the worst role-playing game sessions I've ever been a part of. Ever. It was a pickup game for the staff of a convention, and we were going to play Star Wars. Awesome. We were a group of people from the Republic, or from the Rebellion, just after the Battle of Endor. Emperor's dead, Vader's cooling on his pyre, and now there's still this Imperial garrison on Endor, and we need to go in and clear it out. We spend an hour planning for this. You know, I'm a Padawan Jedi, but I'm Chiss. I'm one of Admiral Thrawn's people. I've got this whole infiltrator thing going on where I can disguise myself, and so a whole bunch of us get into the compound, and a whole bunch of us are around ready, and we have the ship ready to come in and get us out when this doesn't go well. And the healer of the party says, I've got to talk to them. I'm like, okay, you know what? That's fair. That's something that Lightsiders, you would feel a compulsion to go in and negotiate. These are diehard Imperials, so we'll be ready to pull you out of the fire when that happens. And the healer goes in and says, you finds the commander, sneaks your way in, and says, you're completely surrounded, the Emperor is dead, and this is all fallen, you really need to give up. And for some reason known only to himself, the game master had the Imperial commander of the base go, you know what? You're absolutely right. We can't win this fight. We're going to surrender. And then everyone's next 4 hours of gameplay was watching the healer negotiate the terms of surrender. That is a villain who lacked determination. to the point where he couldn't even really be called a villain at that point. He wasn't even a plot complication. He was that dude that you need to talk to make the next thing happen. So, powerful, intelligent, immoral, wounded, determined. I personally would add 2 more things to that to make your epic villain truly a great epic villain. And stacking up my adjectives. A truly great villain is likable. You might not like him, but he's likable. He's personable. He's approachable. That makes him that much more dangerous. Because while you might be trying to get into the villain's head, the villain's trying to get into yours. Like, yeah, I know we're trying to kill each other, but can we just take a minute here? Look, maybe there's a misunderstanding. Can we talk about this? A villain starts doing that, you need to shoot them in the face right away. The heroic path is to, oh, well, sure. I guess talking about this is the right thing to do. Let's see if we can find a peaceful conclusion. Because that's what that particular villain is counting on. They're likable, they're personable. They may even be genuinely really nice people. But they have an agenda that means they're going to try and do something horrible. And getting to know them only makes it harder to stop them. And then, finally, I would say that a truly great villain is also noble. Yeah, they're trying to do something horrible, but they might have the best of intentions. Ra's al Ghul, Batman villain, and top-tier Batman villain, comes across as having that noble character. Yes, he's this serially immortal psychopathic, homicidal maniac who is determined to have his way, but his way is a world where mankind cannot pollute and destroy the earth. He has a strong environmental streak, and yes, it means you're going to have to kill millions of people, at least, if not billions, to remove the strain of society on the ecosystem of the earth. But that leaves a world for the future that you can give to your offspring, your children. Are we going to let everyone live at the cost of no one living tomorrow? That nobility, or noble purpose. If you have characters or player characters at some point in your game looking at each other and asking themselves whether the villain might not be right, maybe even just a little right, like, do we really have to stop him? Can't we just tone it down a little bit? Maybe he is right. A group of player characters is going to destroy any villain you build. It happens. Yeah, you're going to have your Doctor Dooms or your Mechanons or your Ultrons or your Thanos who will be back in some way, shape, or form. You can never really kill a great villain, but you can beat them. You can beat them all day long. When you've got people who can rip trains in half lengthwise with their eyelids, you're going to have people beating up these villains. The challenge isn't to make a villain that they can't beat up. Your challenge is to make a villain that the heroes don't want to beat up. You can have the fight in the villain's headquarters or on a street corner. You can have this fight on the top of Mount Everest or in front of the Washington Monument. But the fight that you stage in the head of the heroes is the one the heroes have the best chance of losing. And that is when a villain gives you a heroic challenge. Not that what the villain is doing is so horrible and automatically terrible that you're all just going to show up and drop hammers on him until he stops moving. But what the villain is doing is horrible and terrible, and maybe, just maybe, a little right. If at some point during a game I have players look at me and curse my name for them not being able to decide whether or not it's time to take the villain out, I've done my job. If I get a room full of guys and or gals to give me the collective finger because they trusted the villain and the villain turned on them, and it's one of those moments of, curse your sudden but inevitable betrayal, then I've done my job. If, as a game master, you can pull off that trick of, after running a game for 6 months, the characters look at each other going, maybe this time the villain's not entirely wrong. And then the villain stabs them all in the back and everyone turns on you because they bought it this time. Yeah, you've done your job as a game master and given people something that their characters can agonize over and that you all have stories to tell about for the next rest of your lives. Villains. Next time, maybe I'll talk a little bit about the qualities of heroes, or maybe I'll actually give myself into some of that political commentary that keeps trying to come up that I keep clamping down on, or maybe I'll let Uncle Drac deal with that for me. In the meantime, if you enjoyed this video, I would ask that you like it, perhaps share it, spread it around a little bit, subscribe, and see my videos as they show up. If you really enjoyed this video, I invite you to hit me up at my Patreon page at www.patreon.com/ScottCorum and consider donating. Anything is a help. Will let me put in more material in my videos, add some special effects from time to time, perhaps a little bit better video production, and more role-playing supplements. In the meantime, thank you very much for your attention. I'm Scott Corum. This is What Has Mattered to Me, and I will see you next time on the next Matters of DeCorum.